called Reinvented, a 12-artist exhibition and catalog featuring digitally produced ceramics. You will also get to know Adam a little more during this conference as one of our emerging artists. I introduce Adam and Megumi. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. How do I turn? It's on? You can hear me? Welcome. Thank you so much. Oh, Megumi's is not on. Oh, okay. I will also mention thank you, Kelly and Megumi, who were also emerging artists at different times. So very honored to be here. I really wanted to collaborate with people in the Fab Lab. I felt like the past two iterations, we had amazing presentations, but I really wanted to connect us together. So I'm so happy that I connected with Megumi to talk about ideas. I think I took a bunch of risks that I normally would not have, and I hope that the other presenters feel the same, that it's pushing us forward. The title is Digital Still Life Mouse. The impetus was actually one of Megumi's pieces. Actually a lot of your pieces that are inspired by still lives. And I just want to run down how I see my practice intersecting between digital technology and handcraft. So last year, I also showed this 2x2. If you see the vertical axis, on one end, there's manufactured. The other is handmade. So when I say hand, something's made by hand. Above, there is manufactured, so something that can start, stop, and complete all on its own, void of the hand, the opposite. And then on the horizontal axis, we have the digital on the left-hand side. So something that takes information with ones and zeros. It's taking non-direct information through a computer system and then spitting that information back out to complete a process. And then on the other hand, analog. So direct information. I touch it, something happens to it, right? So I'm not going to go through all of the quadrants. I'm speeding this up a little bit, but the upper left, upper right, and the bottom right are all kind of processes that we know. If you start at the bottom right, we have things like the floor loom. That is a hand process with an analog technique. And then if you move up to the upper right-hand quadrant, sticking with the loom, let's say in the middle, you go into the jacquard loom, which is starting to use stencils. Other things in this quadrant includes templates, things like jigger and jollying, mold making, things like that. It's still a hand process, but it's using a more standardized kind of framework. Then when we move to the left, that's kind of the industrial revolution that we're seeing with, or the second one, with digital technology. We have CNC machines, 3D printing, an automated jacquard loom. So instead of using hand keys to punch, we've automated it. Digital printing, and I also put digital photography there. What I'm really interested in is the bottom left. How can you incorporate something that's a hand process with digital technology? It's a really funky, weird quadrant that has a lot of potential, I see, because I'm trying to draw a bridge between handmade and digital, right? They don't have to be opposite. I'm trying to find solutions to integrate both of them. The exhibition Reinvented that started at Clay Arts Center in Portchester had 12 people that did this pretty perfectly. I was looking for ceramicists that really blended the two without having one stronger than the other. So let's see, for example, let's see, Shayron Alron, the middle left, that's called his Unlimited series. He had a 16-part mold that he could rearrange every single time, but it was up to, and he only makes one of each combination. There are over 7 billion variations, one for every person on the planet. There is, let's see, Mia Malvi on the middle right-hand side. She is 3D scanning ancient trees. This one is called Kongigen, which is from Denmark. She 3D scans it and then prints it. I think it's a lovely analogy between printing in layers and tree rings. So this exhibition just came down at the Clay Studio in Philadelphia, and we'll be going to Baltimore Clay Works in April and then traveling to Wesleyan University in Nebraska in the fall. My own work, if you've seen some of the expo space downstairs, uses digital technology in kind of a painterly way. I use handmade brushes. My idea with incorporating the hand is to actually hack the hardware, not necessarily hacking the software or hacking the machine itself. I believe that making handmade tools really enables us to live within a digital environment, but add variation to it. So I have a process, right? I have a machine, a CNC machine, but so it's standardized, and the only variable I'm changing is the tool itself. I use many different animal hairs, anything from foxtail, caribou, squirrel, you name it. If anyone's interested in brush making, you can come and see me. My only recommendation I would say now is go to a tackle shop to buy hair. Don't buy a huge pelt and try to cut up. You can buy 2-inch by 2-inch squares of hair, which it took me a long time to figure that out. So I will be demoing at the end of the presentation of how it works, but just to give you an illustration, the machine starts at its home 0, it travels to a reservoir of cobalt, picks up the cobalt with the brush, and then goes over a plate or a tile. I was just talking to Joe about, when I was first starting to think about how to introduce cobalt in with the tool, that, everyone thinks of a syringe or how do you get the cobalt in? But since I was working with hand processes, when you paint, you put your hand into the cobalt, right? It's a very natural state. So I really wanted the machine to reflect that. So it's dipping into the cobalt as well. These are some early plates that I have. They are the exact same motions. This machine goes within a tolerance of 0.02 millimeters of a deviance, meaning that if I have the same program over and over again, it's not going to deviate. It is doing the same thing precisely. But since I'm using a handmade tool that is super different from each other, and I have examples here, I get a different result. So that's the variable that I'm changing. In terms of collaboration that I've done, which is, I think, the main theme about this Fab Lab, the one on the left is a collaboration I did with Mike Stumbris. He threw the plate and ornamented it, and I CNC'd it and put gold luster. And some people don't see an image. Some people do. It is a rooster. I did put gold to reflect that, but some people see an ink blot. So a lot of these things that I'm doing are kind of like ink blot tests. Sometimes you see it, sometimes you don't. If you see this postcard here, it was really important for me to put the abstracted middle one on because I want to show that I can get an abstract image and I can get a representational image all in the same toolpath. And it's an industrial technique. I can get something extremely industrial of a process with this. And the one on the right, Megumi made, do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. I do a collaboration with students. So this is one of the series called Collaborware. So I did the geometric half of it, and then my student did the hand model part of it, and then we kind of put it together to create a collaborative cup. So that was my piece.
So when we started talking to each other, Megumi has an amazing piece called Basket of Mushrooms that I was so inspired by. It is in the Reinvented show. And it poses the question of language, I think. Mm-hmm. If you Google search something, right? You Google search mushroom, what are you going to find? You're going to find real mushrooms. You're going to see cartoon mushrooms. It's a whole kind of different language, a visual language on literary language. And I thought it would be really funny if we did that again, but with a mouse. So this is just a screenshot of a Google search of a mouse, and you can see how many different things pop up. You can see Minnie Mouses in there. You can see cartoon mice, real mice, computer mice, everything. And I'm so fascinated with that, of how we're drawing new connections with the internet and with searches like this. I did put a picture in here of my prototype. I would call it my prototype piece when we were talking about doing this collaboration. I did make an extra large iPad. Usually my work is real size to the electronics I'm using. So this is a real proportion of an iPad, and downstairs I have iPhones and iMacs that are the same proportion. But I did make an XL one, and you can see the beginning of me thinking about mice and drawing mice here in a pattern, kind of abstracting it. So I will go into the demo of how I do this later, but Megumi does have a presentation of her process.
Okay.
Hand it over to her.
Great.
Do you want me to slide over?
Yeah, maybe slide over. All right, so this is where I start. So I Google, or I go to Thanksgivers. I don't know if you have been to Thanksgivers or 3D Warehouse. These are kind of online resources of free three-dimensional models, digital models. And then I download them, and then I would manipulate it to create a physical piece. So as you can see, the Mickey Mouse here, and if you look at the piece over here, they are quite different. And the reason for that is, maybe I should talk about this. I'm kind of known as a low-tech person. Even though I always kind of be interested in the use of technology in my work. So when I started before I started to do this work, I was actually printing digital images onto, two-dimensional slab using Photoshop. And after that, I started to become more interested in 3D modeling. So I started to model using SketchUp, which was free. But then I didn't really have resources to 3D print. So I didn't have a machine. So I thought, how can I translate this digital form into physical form? So I came up with my own process of creating this digital geometric kind of form. So here is the original downloaded, version of the Mickey Mouse. And then what I would do is I would bring this into a program called Blender. So Blender is also, what do you call it? The open source, yeah, thank you. Open source, program that you can download. So I use that to model my pieces. And so in this case, you call this decimating faces. So you basically reduce the number of polygons to create this geometric form. So from there, I use a program called Pepakura. This is also a free downloadable program. Pepakura? Yeah. It's a Japanese program. It's by Japanese, it means papercraft, but they made it kind of short as Pepakura. And it only runs on PC. So if you have a Mac, you have to run the boot camp, but you can also run this on your Mac. So what Pepakura does for you is that it will unfold your three-dimensional form. So then, as you can see, the pattern over here is basically the pattern to create the three-dimensional form that you see here. So then I will print this onto a piece of paper. Then, as you can see, I am actually constructing this physically, right, by paper, using a rubber cement and tape. And then I would shellac this over to make the form a little bit more rigid, so you can actually pour plaster in it. So then, and then also plaster bandage. So you basically make a shell to create a very hard shell. Otherwise, when you pour the plaster in it, it would just disform. So then here, this is me just mixing plaster, and then pour the plaster into the form. And then eventually, when you're done with that, you just tear the shell out. And what's left is the plaster model of this piece that you see here. And then from here, you do a traditional mold making process. So I do casting. So then I will use this model and then basically make the casting mold. And then that's a clay piece. It looks pretty much exactly the same as what you see here, basically translating digital form into paper, the paper to plaster, plaster to mold making, and then eventually to porcelain. So the mouse over here, this is something new because my school actually purchased a 3D printer. So then what I did was I printed the mouse using the PLA, and then I just did a traditional mold making from that. And the result is here, which you will see also on that piece. So that's pretty much what I have for my process. And that's it. Really.
So before I go into the actual demo, these are our websites and my contact information. Do any of you have questions now about content or process? I'm very open to talking. Yes?
Oh, Pepakura, it's P-E-P-A-K-U-R-A. Pepakura.
Pepakura. Any other questions before we move on? So the CNC machine, I've been getting a lot of questions of what brand is it? What model is it? It's just, this one's called a General iCarver. I-C-A-R-V-E-R. I got it off of Woodcraft, so woodworking online sites will have it. It has a 7-inch gantry, which is the space between the bed and the top of the head, so I can only put an object that big into it if I want, which is why I use flat pieces. But I will say, if you take a picture of this and you look at it, iCarver might not be around, but if you see a similar model, if it's a different color than green, it's the exact same machine. It comes from the same factory. They just put a different label on it, put it in a different color. So it is the same. If it looks the same, it is. I've altered it a little bit. It originally comes with a kind of a corrugated steel base where you can put anchors in. However, I don't need it. So do we have a shot right there? So if you can see, that's they have these ridges, that's corrugated. Since I'm using ceramic that's wet, I don't want material to go in there. So I've put a piece of plexi and then a piece of rubber over it just to be waterproof. And then here's my reservoir. If you saw the diagram, what I do when I model in Rhino, and then I use RhinoCam as my toolpath generating, I actually draw this out as a vector, and then I draw my item out as a vector, and I place them, and I measure the distance between the two. So I can actually put it here, and it would be fine, or I can move it here, and it would be fine. As long as the distance is the same, I set the 0, 0 wherever I want. And that's a little different depending on what CNC machine you have. Some need to have a specific 0, 0. I'm also working, I should also mention, this particular model of CNC. This works in the lower right-hand quadrant. So when you model, usually people model in the upper right-hand quadrant because it's positive, positive. I'm actually positive, negative. So you model under. Otherwise, the machine is going to try to go this way, and it can't. So what else can I say about this? It also has a 1/4-inch collet, nut, and bolt. So I can't actually do bigger things over 1/4 of an inch with the tool. My workaround is to make a 3D printed adapter. Zero in on this. So this part right here is a solid 1/4 inch that will fit into the collet, and then I beefed it up to a 1/2 inch shaft where I put all of the handmade, or not handmade, just sourced fur inside. And I just use hot glue. There's nothing fancy about it. And this is just from a 3D printer that's printing PLA. All I really need is for this shaft to be 1/4 of an inch so it fits inside. So I'll turn it on. Makes a little bit of a sound. Is there anything in there now? Nope. So I'm going to put on a face that's on the postcard, which these are also downstairs. I have a video playing downstairs in the expo. So here's my control panel right here. I can operate it. What it's doing is it's setting its own 0, 0, and then it's making sure right here that it's at its highest point possible. So it takes a second to use the stepper motor to find it. It goes down. So what I'll do is I'll choose a brush that strikes my fancy. Let's see. Let's do Caribou. I'm like really into it these days. Okay, and usually I put it in through the front. Any other questions when I'm doing this? Yeah?
So that actually has like a router type machine in there, right?
So this is a router. It's a CNC milling machine. I forgot to mention that just because I feel like I'm back in last year where I like went into detail. Yes, it is a router machine. It does spin. It is meant to cut wood, acrylic, metal, etc. I go into the G code, and there is a certain line in the beginning of the G code. It's called M03, which tells the spindle to go on. I change it to M05, which turns the spindle off. It's all in the library. Each machine is going to have a different library, but you can easily find it online. It just basically tells you, is there a coolant? How fast do you want the spindle? And you just go into the code and you just switch it. So I did kind of hack it a little bit, but it doesn't spin at all. It free, I can turn it, things like that. So what I'm going to do is I have all of these. It does have a USB in the back over here. So what I do is I generate my toolpath from my PC. RhinoCam, to my knowledge, is only working on PC, although Rhino itself can work on a Mac. I don't know if they've changed that yet. So I generate the code. There's no vector, there's no picture. It's just all pure code onto the USB and then put it in here. So I'm going to select my file, and I've got like 30 in here, so I have to go down a lot, and then sometimes I label them with weird names. So I have to, is it the face, is the iPad, is it the portrait, is it, I'm pretty sure it's face. Maybe it's not. Maybe it's iPad. I think it's iPad. We'll try. I mean, they're both faces, so we'll see. Okay, so can you see, right now it's set to 0, 0, 0, 0, and I'll try to do this backwards. So this is important. When I said I was in the negative positive, I'm going to go negative y, and then positive x. And I've already set the code to dip into the cobalt reservoir 1/2 inch, and then when it goes into the face part, I've programmed it to go 0.125 inches, so 1/8 of an inch. But what I have to do is Z down to a certain point. And I didn't actually mix this cobalt up a lot, so I'm hoping it will work. Yeah, I'm just being a little imprecise. Okay, so then what you can see over here, I've changed the coordinates. So you can say I'm 7 inches in, 4 inches, and then I went down 2 inches. I have to cycle down to reset those coordinates back to 0 to make sure the machine knows it's at its 0 point. Why is that important? It's important because the way I generate my toolpaths is from the center of the reservoir. I could technically send it here as 0 and tell it to go here, but I'm actually not precise when I put the dish of cobalt down. So I think home is better where the cobalt is than the machine's natural home. So, oops. I am going to go back in the process, and let's hope it's the program I want. So I programmed it to spin about 1/2 inch to kind of pick up material. Yeah, this is the right one. So sometimes you can see that I get a really great image. Sometimes it's abstract like this, but I really don't see, I like the beauty in all of them. So this one's a fairly abstract one right there, but you can kind of see two eyes. Let's try to make one a little bit more representational. I know squirrel does really well. Is that weird that I'm obsessed with? And I'm going to preload this brush just to make sure there's so much on it. Now, since I'm not moving this dish, the machine knows where 0, 0 is. But every single time I turn it off and turn it on, it resets, so it has no idea where it is.
So have you ever used this for cutting? You know, like...
Me?
Yeah.
I haven't.
Okay.
I knew from the get-go what I was,
you
that
wanted
I wanted
to do this.
paint. Yeah.
Okay.
But you could. I've thought of it. I use, I did press molding last year as my demo, and those were laser cut, but I could have CNC cut it.
Mm-hmm.
Could have. It's in my home studio, which is kind of a ceramic studio, and I don't want that dust of MDF to be going in. I don't have ventilation like that. Okay, so let's try this again. Let's see what we get. So the fun part for me is I have no idea what's going to come out. So that keeps it fresh, right? I'm making multiples, but I have no idea. It's just, it's like this thing is my collaborator also. iPad, and then I'm just choosing the old origin. And it's going to know where 0 is. Any other questions while this is going? Yeah? So the question was, do I consider these monoprints? I was actually in a show at the Clay Studio called Transference, and it was a printmaking show, and I was invited because they thought conceptually I was a printmaker. I am literally pressing print. I don't consider them monoprints, I consider them paintings. I think the action is less of a template that's being printed, and I think the gesture is being painted. The action is painting. So I consider them paintings more than prints. So I'll also say that these are all once fired, since they're slabs and I'm just putting cobalt on it. I just once fire it. It saves me a firing. Okay, so that one's a little, I mean, there's no such thing as good, bad, but that's, can you guys see?
Yeah.
That's better, right? And sometimes I'll get more lips, sometimes I'll get more ear. I like it all. And I've got one more to play with. Okay, do you want, I've got deer tail, fox, or bear. What do you guys, fox?
Bear.
Bear. Okay, I'm gonna do fox.
Fox.
The funny thing is I don't use fox often because if you guys have ever played with a foxtail or anything, it's actually fairly waterproof. It dries almost instantly. So what I really need to make sure that this is good. So let's just get it nice and wet. And usually I don't do this, but like I said, I didn't mix this cobalt well.
Hey, Adam, when you're drawing in Rhino, you know, these different designs, are you drawing freehand or are you copying images? How does the content of the imagery play into it?
Yep. So for the selfie series, which is at the expo, I actually took a selfie of myself. I thought that was fairly important conceptually. And then I drew the outline as the toolpath. So I really did use a kind of a template or a picture to work from. Everything else is freehand. I actually haven't used a Wacom tablet to do it. I use a mouse and I kind of freehand and then I'll adjust it. I know from working, I'll just turn this on while I'm talking. I know from working that the toolpaths, I wish I could show you some of the toolpaths, they look actually fairly different than what comes out, just because the brush usually is about 1 inch or 2 inches long, that I know the curve needs to go a certain way in order to represent an ear or something like that. So it's slightly skewed. And that just takes some intuition of knowing, oh, that's like the mouse that's on here. Let's see, I knew that I actually had to, the toolpath is more rounded up here because I knew the brush was going to drag, and I knew it wasn't going to go up, it was just going to drag along, so I extended it up in order to create that subtle curve there. But that's a great question. I think about that a lot, of like, what's the source imagery? Do I freehand it? Do I not? Do I take from another picture? But so far, yeah, that's how it's been. Did you have a question?
Yeah, so when you make these, do you do several versions until it's like the right version that you like?
So the question was, how many do I do, and am I doing it because I'm looking for a certain quality? And the answer is no. I like to make in series. I usually pick a random number of, if I'm in a show, they need X amount. And there's no right or wrong, because since I show them in series, can you see this again? You need to understand this in order to understand this. You need to know the comparison. That's why I'm showing them in multiples. You know, this one can live alone. Wait, this one can live alone. This one, not so much. It needs to be compared to another thing. I see it as valid because it's doing the same movement. However, when I'm trying to educate people and showing it in a show, I really think it needs to live alongside other things. So I actually think this is so beautiful. I think it's great. And in comparison to ones that are more literal and ones that are more abstract, is going to be a great spectrum. And, you know, that's the metaphor for you know, human existence. We're the same, but we're different at the same time, right? You know, we all have those slightly different features that make us us. And the variable is not only the brush, but it is the consistency of the cobalt. How full is the reservoir? Is it thick? Is it thin? Etc. So let's see what the foxtail does.
So this is capable of painting on three-dimensional surface, right? So like if you were to paint onto something like this, how would you go about that?
So what I would do, the way I generate my toolpaths is an engraving, which assumes that it's on a flat plane, and then I program it to go down 1/8 of an inch.
Okay.
What I would do is I would project a line onto a 3D model and then have it, I think there's a command in Rhino Cam where you can engrave onto a three-dimensional object. I would just model the toolpath as a curve onto it. I can't really do complex things like Mickey Mouse, but I can definitely do the computer mouse, for sure. I've tried to do it on bowls, but it seems to get a little abstracted too much. So let's see what this looks like. Yep. No, I didn't say that. That's actually a really good point. Why do I use cobalt? I've tried it in many different colors. I've tried it in underglazes, but what happens, if you see the way the machine is working, sometimes it overlaps on itself, and it's very painterly in the fact that the marks itself are overlapping. Underglaze doesn't do that. Underglaze is so opaque that you can't, you know, it's just not beautiful. It just looks kind of like a blob. Copper doesn't do that. Cobalt is one of the most sensitive oxides that we can use. So sensitive you can get a baby blue, and some of them, if you see downstairs, it'll turn purple and crystallize when it's super thick. And I like showing that overlapping and how that one gesture, you know, it's a contour. It's just this one movement going on. So that's why I use it. Also, I want to root it in tradition. I am exploring my Asian heritage. I originally, if anyone knows my work, prior to the kind of screen tile stuff, I was making plates. That was really linked to a type of Japanese ware called kosometsuke, which is a Chinese export into Japan, where you should look them up. They're the gorgeous. They're one of the most beautiful things in the world. They're silhouetted dishes with cobalt designs in it. So it's a silhouette form, and then the cobalt kind of fills in the picture. So they'll have like bunny rabbit ears, but then in cobalt draw like the bunny whiskers. And so I thought it's a great marriage between form and surface. So I've brought that to a new level and said, like, the iPad is the new silhouette, right? You guys know it's an iPad, but 10 years ago, if I made that form, would you have known that? Like, that it's about electronics? Probably not. So I love that as a symbol. Are there any other questions with me or Megumi? Yeah, in the back? Not really, but day to day, sometimes I'll accidentally pour a little bit more water than I wanted to, or a little less than I wanted to, and I just roll with it. I don't. There is kind of a consistency I'm looking for, but if I deviate from that, I don't mind at all. Again, if cobalt really piles up, it'll turn purple. If it's very light, it'll look watercolory, and I like it all. Was there another? Yep. Of the iPads? Yeah. iPads, I don't know, probably 40.
Only 40. So
Yeah.
when you decide as you move on, it's time to explore something different, because the process
Yep.
is kind of
Mm-hmm.
giving you the ends.
Yep, sure. I think exhibition opportunities, one, if they're interested in the work, then I'll make more. Interest online. Yeah, I don't think there's really a right answer. So I started with the iPads, and then I moved on to the iPhones, and that's downstairs as well. I thought that was a really good companion. If anyone saw the talk yesterday, I talked about iteration. I went to school for industrial design that really taught me to iterate. The next thing you make is influenced by the thing prior to it. It's always building. There's not necessarily a finished object. You're always working towards something. So I make in series, and then I think, oh, what's the next thing? An iPhone. And then what's the next thing to that? An iMac. And then I go from there, and it's kind of like a story that I'm just going along. So, yeah. Yes?
Have you considered, like, acting like the machine and pouncing maybe your profile and you being the hand, or are you sold on the machine?
Here's the thing. Last year, someone saw the work without seeing the process, and she said, I've been painting for 20 years. I know how to do that. And I believe that she could have made that pattern, but not like this. So I really bet she can't, and I'll tell you why. The machine's z-axis is so stable. It is consistent through the whole thing. I don't program it to go up and down. It's a machine, right? It is perfectly going in a horizontal plane the whole time. It is so perfect. It's depositing the cobalt so effectively that you get a different result. I've tried to do it with my hand, and I wish I was that good. I'm really not. I get a different result. I think the machine is more beautiful. Yeah. Anyone else? So please come up, see the machine. Oh, yep.
Do you already say what cone you fired to?
I fire to cone 6, 5.5, 6. I use a standard porcelain 365. At a higher 6, it will bloat a little bit, so I've dropped the temperature down. I go to about 2220. Yeah. So please come up, see the machine, see me and Megumi. Thank you so much.
Thank you.